Welcome to the online bylaw review workshop by the Alberta Association of Agricultural Societies. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Tim Carson, and back there behind all the technical side of things, our producer for today, if you will, is Tracy Foster. I wanted to let you know that this event is being recorded. So if you're, don't want to reveal your shoe and hat size, that's fine. You don't have to. As far as questions go, there's two ways that we can do that. I will stop periodically to have you ask a question online live. The other way is to type into the chat box. If you go scroll to the bottom of your screen, you'll see chats there, and you can type in your questions, and Tracy will stop me at whatever point that comes in, and we'll answer your questions as they come through. You don't have to wait till the end. I wanted to let you know about the resources. So shortly after this meeting is over, all of the resources that we will be providing you will go out to the email that you registered with. So if you have come online with a different email or something like that, the resources are going to go to the one that you've registered with. So please be aware of that. The last thing I want to make sure that you're aware of is that you can contact our office anytime after this presentation if you have questions or concerns or just need some clarification on any of the information that we're providing you today. All right, let's get started here. So we've already sort of done our welcomes and introductions. We're going to talk about some of the critical documents today. We're going to talk about the best practice bylaws. Now, we're not going to go through the bylaws on a line-by-line basis. You guys would quit and leave long before we got to the end of that. But what we are going to do is actually talk about it section by section so you understand why we're doing some of the things we're doing inside our best practice. We're also going to talk about the approval process for the Alberta Agricultural Societies. We have had ag societies in the past from anywhere from Ontario all the way across to BC joining us for this program, and I'm not quite sure if they're online today, but we can address those as we move along. We're going to review all of the resources that we're going to send out, and again at the end we'll pause for some time to answer any questions that you might have. Shall we jump right in? Can you hear Tracy nodding yes? All right. So let's talk about the legislation first. The Act is the legal documents that our agricultural societies gain their status from, the Agricultural Societies Act. In case of any unclear matters, the Act is considered the ultimate authority along with its regulations. So we have to understand that those two things work in harmony together. Nothing in the Agricultural Societies bylaws can contravene the Act or the regulations. The Act ensures that the details that are required are included in your bylaws. Acts are passed by our MLAs, and this says 2 years, but you have until June 30th, 2022 to become compliant with the new Act and regulations. So that's a little over a year, I guess. I guess it's quite a bit over a year, but anyway, 18 months.
Two AGMs.
2 AGMs, depending on when your AGM is. Your bylaws are the detailed rules of the organization that the members have agreed to. The bylaws provide clear statements that all members should understand. Well-written bylaws can help you, your organization, settle disagreements and by clarifying what should be done. If changes to your bylaws of the Agricultural Society are necessary, they must be approved by your general membership at a general meeting or a specific meeting called for the purpose of changing your bylaws. And then they must be sent to Ag and Forestry for approval. Now, here's a difference in the process from, say, the Societies Act that many of you may be familiar with other organizations, is that you are not allowed to operate by your new bylaws until they are approved by Ag and Forestry. So that's a very important and critical piece to know and understand before you get carried away and start implementing the changes. Next set of critical documents are policies. Policies are what answer what the organization will be doing. We can have a policy around, we will hold an annual event. We have policies around how we manage travel costs. We can have policies around conflict of interest. We can have all sorts of different policies that our board puts together. They describe a consistent course of action that the organization will follow, and they must fall within the parameters of the bylaws themselves. They can't sort of deviate from what the rules are. And they are approved by the board of the organization, and they can be changed by the board. Again, we can talk about a policy conversation if you'd like offline, but generally speaking, policies are exactly that. You can have a sponsorship policy, you can have a policy around donations, you can have all sorts of policies that allow your organization a consistent level of decision making that utilizes your time at the board meetings much more clearly. Procedures are how to carry out the policies that you've created. They're details that take the policies into action, and they can be developed and approved by either the board or the chairperson or whoever is implementing that. Procedures are extremely important when we're talking about succession or trying to find somebody else to help us do things. Having a set of instructions on how to manage the bar, how to put on the event would make that changing of the guard or having that opportunity for people to take on those roles much easier if we actually had these things. Quite frankly, most of us who have been in the event industry for quite some time know what we're doing and all of those types of things, but we've not actually written it down so that we can transfer that information to the next person should we actually find them. Any questions on the sort of those 4 critical documents? We have the legislation, which includes the regulations. We have our bylaws, we have our policies, and we have procedures as far as our organizational critical documents that all ag societies should have in some way, shape, or form. Hearing none. Tracy seeing none. We can always come back to that if you think of something. All right. Moving on to our best practice bylaws. Now, like I said, in the resources, you will receive our best practice bylaws in their entirety. We're going to go through them section by section right now so you understand the intent of all of the information that you're going to receive. So within the definitions section of your bylaws, the definitions are there to improve clarity. Terminology can be a pitfall. The difference between a capital D director and a small d director is quite substantial, and it is clearly stated in our best practice. But from a layman or somebody who's just looking at your bylaws, they may or may not understand the difference. In many cases, there can be several interpretations of keywords, like I just mentioned. You need to take note of the difference between special resolutions and a special meeting. There's definitions inside the best practice bylaws right now that will help you interpret that. And it's really important that you're able to sort of look at your bylaws as though you've never seen or understood or what an agricultural society is or does, so that that person who's coming into your organization will be able to understand what you're talking about inside your bylaws. Objectives. They clearly state the purpose of your agricultural society. Ag societies are provided a mandate, if you will, through the Act. The Agricultural Societies legislation actually provides a mandate or the objective, major objective of all agricultural societies that you can restate inside your bylaws. You need to make sure that you're keeping your objectives, as you tend to put those in as a bit more of a focal point within your bylaws. You need to keep them broad enough that you can expand or detract your operations or adapt your operations as your community evolves. We've had organizations who have had inside their bylaws an objective that says we will hold an annual greased pig contest. What you need to understand is if it's in your bylaws, it's not I hope we do that or we should like to do that, it's you will do. So you make sure that you're putting in a broad enough level of objectives that allows your organization to be successful not only today but into the future. You should have a vision and a mission statement as part of your strategic planning document. You can use those as part of your objectives. Annual meetings. All aspects of your AGM should be clearly stated in this particular section. It includes how the meetings are to be called and when the meeting is held. The Act requires an order of business for the agricultural societies. The previous Act actually listed an order of business. You are now required to have one inside your bylaws. The reports of activities, the final financial statements, strategic in your business plan, committees and previous AGM minutes should all be included in your agenda. Other agenda items that are not mentioned here could be included. If you've got standing committees that you feel should be reporting during the your annual general meeting, you would want to include those so that none of those things get missed in succession and new people coming on and things like that. Special general meetings include who can call a special meeting, state what the purpose of the special meeting is in the notice. We need to include that in our bylaws, outline the circumstances in which a special meeting may be called, and understand the difference from a special resolution. And again, I'm going to refer back to the definitions that we provided in our best practice, as a special resolution has different timelines based on the new legislation. It's around 21 days notice and things of that nature. So you'll really want to pay attention to what that looks like. Your notice of meetings, it identifies the time required to allow general members to attend meetings. It includes how notice needs to be given, the communication method that you're going to use. There may be different types of notice for your AGM or your general membership meetings or special meetings. And 21 days notice is what I talked about with the special resolution. What you need to understand is historically, the previous legislation stated that you were required to provide 14 days notice for an AGM or a meeting of the general membership. You have the opportunity to choose a different number now. In our best practice, we believe that 14 days notice is still enough time for your members to sort of rearrange their schedules to be able to attend your meeting, but you do have these choices now. Quorum. Quorum is the minimum number of members that are required for you to officially conduct business at a meeting. Your organization can choose your quorums now for both general and board meetings. Historically, that was provided to you in the legislation. Now the new regulations have opened that up so that you can choose what that looks like. There are times when larger quorums may be beneficial to ensure that we're getting the best interest, or the interest of the membership is truly being represented in the discussion. And we identify what procedures are if quorum is not met for whatever meeting that you're going to. So if we don't get quorum, what happens? We need to have that stated into our bylaws. How are we doing? Nothing so far. Okay, if I'm going too fast, please send a message that I'm going too fast. I know for some of you, I'm probably not going fast enough. Voting. Who is eligible for voting at both the general membership meetings as well as board meetings? We need to identify when and if the president can vote. Just to unpack that a little bit, many organizations have utilized the president as a tiebreaker. In our best practice, we consider that every board member has one vote, and if there is a tie, the motion is lost because obviously there's no majority. The challenges that we have seen with the president breaking the ties is you effectively annoyed half your board by doing so. So at the end of the day, one person, one vote. And how those votes should be can be cast. So whether we have the opportunity to use secret ballot, proxy voting, electronic voting, etc. With the use of technology today, we have lots of options to us as organizations for voting. As best practice, we don't consider proxy voting to be best practice. Proxy is giving your vote to somebody else so they have two. Again, the amount of discussion and the ability to gather information may change a person's mind, and we're of the opinion that one member, one vote. Composition and election of the board. You need to state here, what are the number of directors required? Historically, it's been 12 as the number that an Ag Society has. Your organization can choose a number that is specific to your organization now. In our best practice, after all of the consultation that we did, 9 was the number that our membership supported the most, and which we consider a good number for an organization who receives the level of commitment from our government and funds and things of that nature. But again, you have the opportunity to look into your organization and find out what's best for today and tomorrow. Terms of office for those directors. How long are they there? What are the term that they're elected to? How often that they are eligible to be a director? And what sort of nomination process is in place for your organization should be part of your bylaws. Powers and duties of the board, a description of the responsibilities of the board of directors as it pertains to the organization and the membership. Primary functions of the board as like things like budgeting, creating policy, procedures development, all of that should be outlined so that somebody who is interested in becoming a member of your board would understand what the board's overall duties are. Duties of the officer and secretary. The basic job descriptions of all the positions on your board, including a board member. The responsibilities of the executive committee should be stated here as well. One of the things that we have recognized is that, or what you need to recognize is that the executive has no power that the board does not give them. So outlining what that executive committee in this section has the responsibility to do is very important. Meetings of the board, the process for election of positions should be outlined in this section, which positions are elected, which ones are appointed, and when the process should take place. Frequency of board meetings and process for special board meetings should be defined here as well. We have seen organizations who elect specific positions, president, vice president, treasurers, and so on, by the membership. Our best practice says the membership elects all the board members, and then the board members elect the executive from their own numbers. Again, your board will have to have a conversation around what's going to be working best for you for today and into the future.
Do you have a question? Can we state minimum number, and do we have to state maximum years?
Okay, two very good questions, and one piece that I missed. Many of our organizations have used a bit of a floating scale in the past, minimum of 12, maximum of 19, those types of things. The new act and regulations say you must pick a number. You don't get the floating scale anymore. Two, you do have to state what the maximum term is. Now, you may not have, you may have your board members are always eligible, but at least they had to have a term that would say a 3-year term is what we're sort of recommending in our bylaws, and then they're eligible for election again. We have in our best practice that it's a 3-year terms, and then they have to step off the board for a year. Again, we're promoting succession within organizations, so there are opportunities for new people and new information, but your organization is your organization. So if you want to make those people continually eligible, you do have the option to do that.
So Tim, it's Suzanne here. Our Ag Society is really, really struggling with that particular section. They don't want to put number of years at all. So,
but you are going to put it in office though, right?
Pardon me?
Well, they do have to come up for election occasionally, right?
Yes, yeah. So the wording that we've come up with is eligible for re-election at the end of their 3-year term. Done. So elected for 3 years, but it can continue forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay.
Yep. You stated their term has ended, and they are up for election, but they continue to be eligible for election. Okay.
So at the end of 9 years, they don't have to take a year off or no? Okay. Well, that's good. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Did we do meetings of the board? Yep. All right. Proceedings at board meetings. Identify what the quorum needs to be at your board meeting. Clarify voting obligations. Again, are the president or chairperson here? Do they get to vote? Do they have that tiebreaker thing? How does that work? We put this in here. The reports for the AGM should be approved by the board prior to the AGM. So just a little background on that. This is not about being able to censor the reports of committees as they come up. What this is about the opportunity for the board of directors, who is responsible for all operations of the organization, to understand what those committees are going to be reporting on. We have seen instances where committees have given a bit of a scathing report on the board or the operations or something along those lines, and the board itself has been sort of caught flat-footed. This way, your board has an opportunity to explain what has happened and why, and given some thought to what's going on. It's also a great opportunity to make sure that those committees are actually spending the time to write down their report. I think we've all been to those annual meetings where the committee person comes up and speaks off the cuff about what they were doing this year and goes down 3 rabbit holes and 2 turns and 3 exits, and a half an hour later, most people are kind of bored with what's going on. So this way they have the opportunity to put some thought into their report, and it can be clear and concise and get to the point and ensure that everybody who is attending your meeting, their time is taken into account as well. Vacating a director's office. Include the minimum requirements for a director. Historically, there's been a clause around if you've missed 3 consecutive meetings, the board can kick you off. We do have that clause in the best practice, but it does say may instead of must. So there would be a bit of an inquiry as to what's happening and why, and those types of things. You as an organization have that opportunity to sort of say what's going on. We as organizations need individuals being engaged and giving us their intellect in order to make the best decisions possible. You need to include the process for removing members and replacing directors when these requirements are not met. So again, historically, we've had the opportunity to appoint, but you will see in our best practice that we have those pieces still in there. Committees include how and by whom committees can be established. Clarify the general authority of committees of the society. Define requirements of committee members as well as board members' involvement. And terms of reference is something that really should be utilized to spell out the detail of what the committee's job is, what the authority and what the use of the board is, so that everything is quite clear moving forward. Execution of certain documents. Define who has the authority to commit the Agricultural Society into legally binding obligations. These are your signing authorities, right? The society's funds, use, security, as well as investment of society's funds is defined in this section. Identification of signing authorities for accessing and dispersing funds will be stated here. The act, okay, I'm going to just hold on that one. So historically, the legislation has said that president, vice president, and treasurer only. Your organization now has the opportunity to define who has signing authority. You may want to include committee chairs, you want to maybe include, a vice president or a secretary, or if you have a general manager or something along those lines, that is now an opportunity within the organization. You also need to recognize that these people will have the opportunity to disperse funds without necessarily, you just need to manage your risk as you're identifying those signing authorities. The other piece that's new within the Agricultural Societies Act and the regulations is that you are now required to place a limit on the size of the check the signing authorities can write before going back to the membership. So this is a very important discussion around your board table. It's not something you can sort of just ignore. It's a requirement now to put a number in there. So if you're a reasonably small organization who has a hall and does 2 events a year, your limit may be $5,000 based on what you do for operations. If you're a larger organization and you lease equipment and you're doing major renovations, your number could be $250,000. Again, it's your organization's obligation to have the conversation around what does that look like? How do we manage the risk? And how do we ensure that we're taking the best care of our organization's funds before we have to go back to the membership for approval? So hopefully that makes sense to you. Borrowing by the society, it identifies the circumstances and process of approval in which the society may borrow funds. In addition to the limitations must be identified here. Again, that opportunity to buy a piece of equipment or something along those lines, it may be a lease, but at the end of the day, you are placing the organization in a long-term financial commitment. What does that look like? Is it $10,000? Is it $100,000? Again, your board and your organization will have to have this conversation to say what makes sense and what do we need to go, if it's something special, go back to our membership for approval. The fiscal year, a clear statement of the society's fiscal year is really important to have in your bylaws. Alberta annual reporting to Ag and Forestry should be considered when you're creating or identifying your year end. Reporting is now dated for February 15th at the very latest. So if you have not got the time to put all of your information together, get your financial statements done, you may want to look at moving your financial year end. Auditor identifies who may be eligible to audit the society's financial information. The regulations now require that the auditor of an ag society have a professional accounting designation. This is not new. At the end of the day, in the Societies Act, there is the opportunity for peer audits and review, or what's the term I'm looking for? Not a review engagement, that's what you require. Anyway, there's a base one. My apologies. Within your auditor's information here, you need to state what that minimum level is, and it is a requirement. The financial statements, define the level of financial review for the financial statements for your organization. The regulations require a minimum of a review engagement for agricultural societies. So the next level up is an audit. Your organization will probably have something set already. You just want to make sure that that is reiterated in your bylaws. Membership, identify membership criteria as well as the different levels of membership available. How membership fees are determined should be included here as well. Just to clarify, there's a lot of organizations that have general members and they have family memberships. We have seen situations where the family membership was not identified as what that was, even how many votes they get. This particular organization was in a bit of a controversial spot, and people brought their families out, but family was not defined as a unit, what that looked like. So mother, father, brother, sister, aunt and uncle, and two cousins twice removed now constituted a family, and everybody had one vote. So that became a bit of a challenge. So in this section, when you're identifying who memberships are, make sure that you are very clear on what all of that looks like.
That term you were looking for was notice to reader.
Thank you. You're right. Notice to reader, which is basically taking your information and putting it in a format without any checking. Registration of membership. A detailed list of membership for each year must be kept, which includes the name, address, email, date they became a member, date they would maybe have been removed, and a class of membership. Any changes to the board information in Alberta must be shared with Ag and Forestry within 30 days of the change. So this is all reasonably new, but you are required now to keep this list up to date and on file at all times. So that is new, so you'll need to include that in your bylaws. Suspension of membership. This is not something that many organizations have thought to put in their bylaws, but in this interesting time, it has been something that has been required on several occasions. So it's important to have a clearly defined parameters for the suspension of a member, in addition to the process the board and member to follow if an instance arises. You need to include suspension duration, and it should be mentioned in here and things like that. So you need to understand the reason for this is we've had a situation where a member was abusing or vandalizing the facility. So the board actually suspended their membership and they were now not allowed to use that facility for X, Y, and Z. We've also seen the situation where we've had board members or other members who have been blatantly determined to undermine the organization, and you do need some level of way to exercise your authority and remove or manage that situation. And if you don't have anything in your bylaws, trying to create something while you are in the midst of chaos is not a good idea. The next piece to this one is the termination of membership. The circumstances for removing a member are clarified here. The process required for the member and the society to terminate are clearly identified. So again, you don't have to try to come up with this. We have within those best practice both the suspension and the termination of membership clause inside there. You can look at those and see whether or not you understand what's going on, and try and include that in your bylaws. Security, the board responsibilities for ensuring the organization, directors and members against liabilities or risk are identified here. The minimum level of insurance for liabilities are stated. Directors and officers insurance should be a requirement within your bylaws. We have seen a few organizations try to save a few dollars by not having that. That is an incredibly risky and dangerous thing for organizations to do for their volunteers and their board members. If you need more clarification on what that looks like, contact your insurance provider. But at the end of the day, your operations, your facilities, your assets do need to be protected, because they're not, they are the organization's assets. Amendments to the bylaws. Timelines for reviewing the bylaws should be stated in here. The position that is responsible for the review being completed, and the process for change requests and approvals should be outlined here. When we say the position, you may want to make a vice president responsible for making sure that the bylaws get reviewed. Now, how that happens could be done at committee level, could be done as sections during the year at your board meetings. But at the end of the day, we've actually designated a position within our organization to make sure that the bylaws are always up to date. We consider that best practice. Parliamentary authority. The rules of order of the organization follows at general and board meetings. Now, we have all seen the use of Robert's rules and things of that nature. It's important to recognize that not everybody knows and understands what Robert's rules are. Oftentimes when we see somebody flaunting Robert's rules, they're using it more as a weapon than they are as an advantage or a tool to improve the process. So as long as we identify how it is that we're going to run our meetings, both at the general membership level and at our board level, we can ensure that everybody's working from the same page. And we can always refer to Robert's rules as a backup if we don't have something covered in this basic rules of engagement, but this does need to be covered in this part of your bylaws. The dissolution of the society. Procedures for the dispersion of assets of the society are clearly identified, and should the society become non-functional. The Alberta Act clearly defines this process, and we've included that process in those best practices, so you don't have to go digging around for it, but it is in there now. If you've had a gaming license in the past, a dissolution clause is a requirement for your bylaws. Code of conduct. This is a new piece for the legislation and the regulations for all agricultural societies. The society is required to have a code of conduct. All members, officers, and directors and employees must adhere to the code of conduct. Officers, directors, and employees must sign a code of conduct. So we don't recommend that the actual code of conduct be placed into your bylaws, but are more of an appendices to your bylaws. We have included both the code of conduct for the membership as well as the one for board members and any employees, and one for them to sign as examples. We think that they're reasonably good, but again, you have the opportunities to look at those, change them, tweak them, throw them out, make a new set, but at least you're not starting from scratch. But you are required to have a code of conduct. All other matters. Agricultural Societies Act is the legislation that the societies operates under. In no way can your bylaws contradict or supersede the act or regulations. It should state that the bylaws of the society, or if the bylaws of the societies don't cover a particular situation, the act and the regulations have the authority. However, that said, there is a whole list of checklist that we'll be including that Ag and Forestry has provided that will ensure that you have all of that information in your bylaws. Recommended best practice of the bylaws, the acknowledgement of the bylaws, which is the bylaws are a binding document for the organization's operation set out by the membership and the Act. Acceptance of these rules by the membership should be recognized with the date and the location, legal name of the organization, and signatures of the authorizing directors of the day. If no changes are made during the review, you should make sure that you've actually stated someplace on the document that they were reviewed, no changes were recommended. We have seen, where organizations were doing their due diligence, but said there was succession and new people came in, and there was some level of accusation that the bylaws haven't been looked at in 30 years. So at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that we're reviewing these bylaws and noting that whether or not there was changes to them. Changing your bylaws. So again, we recommend that you're reviewing your bylaws annually. Whether or not you find the need for changes is almost irrelevant, but at least they keep top of mind for the committee and your board. You can form a committee. You can, like I said earlier, take time during a particular board meeting to review a section, and so that once we get to the end of our year, we've reviewed all our sections. Once we've drafted a document, if there are changes, and it has been prepared, the board should review that and basically approve it by motion at your board meeting, just so that we know that there's a motion on the books, that the board has looked at this, and we do approve all of the changes. Both the Ag and Forestry, Colin Goslin and Monica Waring over there have agreed to, along with our office, to review your bylaws prior to taking them to your AGM. Hopefully there's enough time in that window to do so. But because of the process that is required, where you review your bylaws, you submit them to your membership, they pass them, and then they must be passed by Ag and Forestry, can cause a bit of a challenge if you didn't get them right the first time, because now you have to call another meeting of your general membership to approve the newly revised bylaws if they don't meet the approval of Ag and Forestry. So Ag and Forestry, as well as our office, has offered to do a bit of a pre-review before you call your people together, just to make sure that once it's all passed at your annual meeting, it will pass the Ag and Forestry one without having to call that meeting once again. You need to bring your proposed bylaws to your annual general meeting or a special meeting called for the purpose of changing your bylaws. This will require a special resolution if it's a special meeting and not an AGM. Once you've gone through that process, there is a request for approval form that is in our resources. We attach that as a cover letter, and we need you to send in 2 signed copies of the revised bylaws, a copy of the minutes from the meeting where the revisions of the bylaws were approved by your membership. Here in Alberta, once you receive the stamped copy that it has been approved by Ag and Forestry, you can then operate by those rules and not before. How we do it? Okay. So get down. I'm really booming right along here. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody. So the resources that we're providing. So in the email that you will receive shortly after this session today, you will get the Agricultural Society's regulations as provided by the province. You will also get the acts, both of those in PDF form, so that you have that at your fingertips. The bylaw requirement checklist. So as I mentioned earlier, Ag and Forestry has provided a checklist for you to go through that will ensure that you could go through, once you've gone through your best practice and you've created your new document, you can go through that checklist and make sure that all of those things are included in your new bylaws. The code of conduct for members, again, that's in a Word document, so you can choose to use that one or look for additions or changes to that. This presentation in its entirety will be online or included in that, the PowerPoint. The recommended best practice bylaws you will get in a Word document, and you will also get it in a PDF, so that once you've gone through and made all the changes to your Word document, you can go back to the PDF and figure out what it said before, so that you can go back and make sure that you've got the intent correct. The request for approval cover letter you will get in there, and that allows the making sure that the Ag and Forestry has contact information and all of the pieces of the puzzle that are required for them to get your approval process done as quickly as possible. We are also including a sample terms of reference in all of these in our information, just so that you understand what can be and should be included in terms of reference for a committee. Two things. The terms of reference template that we've provided is extremely extensive terms of reference. And it is based on the fact that there was a standing committee that was in place for a very long time without a terms of reference. If you have that situation within your organization, we highly recommend that a terms of reference be created collaboratively with that committee. If you're striking a brand new committee, your board can create that terms of reference for them to ensure that the lines of communication are all very clear as to what should and shouldn't happen. I'm down to the questions slide. So we can open it up to any questions that you might have on any of the information that we have provided. Whether you'd like to speak out loud or type in your question, by all means do so. I'm going to take a little sip while a few people I'm sure are typing. The studio audience is very quiet. Again, if we don't get your question today or something comes up a little bit later, the contact information will be in the information that we send out to you, and we're more than happy to answer the questions that you have. Looks like we have one.
We do. If you have really old, out-of-date bylaws, is it easier to start from scratch with the template?
We highly recommend you just start with the best practice and go from there. There may be pieces in your old ones that you want to include, but you're probably better off utilizing that template. It's the reason we created it, so that you didn't have to start from scratch.
Okay, and then do we need to create policies and procedures, or is this a recommendation only?
So I would not recommend you going back and creating this robust library of policies and procedures out of history. But what we do suggest is that as you move forward, there will be times that let's create a policy here. I'll give you a quick example. If you're an organization that gets donation requests from your community, let's just say 4-H wants a donation, you may want to create a policy around, and I'll just pull numbers out of the air, that a policy that says every youth-based volunteer not-for-profit organization in our community who requests a donation will get $500. And that's a policy you will have on your books. So if 4-H comes to you, or Cub Scouts comes to you, or figure skating comes to you, you don't have to bat around the table for half an hour how much money you should give them. You've actually budgeted for 10, you've got a policy on the books, and as long as they meet the policy, you create a procedure, and you'll go from there, and you'll spend 5 minutes talking about it and not an hour. So those are types of things that you would do moving forward. So hopefully that answers your question. I would not suggest going back and trying to create an entire manual, but start putting those things together as you move forward.
Do we send the checklist with our bylaws for review?
Nope. The checklist is specifically for you to make sure that you've got all of those things covered in your bylaws. You don't need to send the checklist in. They're going to use their own checklist. Awesome. So if that, one more.
What would you expect the turnaround time to review a new set of bylaws?
Depending on the time of year, I would expect a couple of weeks. If you are in a rush for your bylaws because your AGM is coming up in a week or something along those lines, by all means, let whoever you're sending those to know that there's a rush and we'd like to have these dealt with in a timely fashion. Don't expect if you try to send your bylaws in for review in January or February or March, that they're going to get to it right away, because the bylaws, or all of the grant stuff is coming in. So just judge yourself accordingly.
when it comes to strategic planning, how do we start the strategic planning?
Strategic planning is a very it's a great process. There are ways that you can do some strategic conversations in-house where it's led by somebody on your board or something along those lines. We do suggest that you bring an outside facilitator in to facilitate a strategic plan for your organization. There's several places that do that. Community development does that for free. AAAS does it. I do strategic planning for our agricultural societies. A strategic plan, we charge about $300 because it's over 2 days. But at the end of the day, we do recommend an outside facilitator so that everybody can participate and they draw that conversation forward into where you're going. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, so we have a question. Okay, for an AGM that is in December, we may be looking at starting the process now and submitting after the grants have gotten out of the way.
Yeah, that's fine. So you won't be able to have your new bylaws passed until either your next AGM in December 2021, or you can call a special general meeting anytime during the year. It would require a special resolution, which means 21 days notice and a few different things like that. No, that's afterwards. Anyway, you would call a special general meeting for the purpose of changing your bylaws in any time during the year, or you can wait until your annual general meeting. All right. Holy smokes, I'm getting really fast at this.
Our revised bylaws then get sent to Monica for review.
That's correct. Actually, Colin is the one who's designated for the approval, but Monica and Colin will do the review, the final review.
Can I speak?
Again, go ahead.
Okay, since I can't happen to get this working for me, it's back to the election of directors, and the bylaw states that there's 12 or more directors each year at the annual general meeting. And so I don't know, I think it was set at 12, but no set number is for us. So thus each year there is a different number of directors. Like sometimes there is 12, sometimes there's 15, the next year sometimes there's 13. How does that work?
So you won't be able to do that moving forward. In the new bylaws, you have to state a particular number that is going to make up your board of directors. We consider best practice to be 9. If you're happy with 12, then you can stay at 12. You don't have to change that number, but you do have to pick a number. And then from there, you're going to recognize the terms of office. So how long will those people be in their positions before they're up for re-election again? One of the things that we have suggested in our best practice as far as risk management is concerned is that you never have more than a third of your board up for election at any one time. So if your board is always all elected at each year and you want to start this succession plan and risk management program where we're going to elect, let's just say 9 directors, we're going to determine that. The first year that we're going to implement this plan, we would elect 3 board members for 1 year, we would elect 3 board members for 2 years, and we would elect 3 board members for 3 years. Subsequent that, once that 1 year group comes up for election again the next year, we would elect those new directors for 3 years. And now what we have happening is that every year 3 directors are coming up for election. So one of the reasons that, again, that we've suggested this is that you can never have an entire board be taken over by a new group that shows up and just sort of votes them in at your AGM to sort of take over the organization. It's a bit of risk management in creating this succession, but at the end of the day, we do consider it best practice because we have seen situations where that has happened. Does that make sense to you?
that makes sense. Now, what happens like on year 2 that there is like only 3 on the board and there were supposed to be 4 and there's like 6 people and they want to put everybody on year 3?
So once you've started that succession process, if somebody leaves and you need to, bring somebody in to replace somebody, they're replacing or they're elected to complete the original term of the person who left, not a new 3 years for each time you bring somebody in.
Thank you.
Okay, does that make sense? That way
makes sense to
way
me.
you keep that rotation going, that, there's a number of directors who are coming up, a third of your directors who are coming up every year for re-election. And each director is knowingly coming in for a 3-year term.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So we have a question that says, so what happens if we state 12 directors in the bylaws, but now have 15? Do we fire, in quotation marks, 3?
So that is one of the challenges. You will have to come up with how you're going to transition that. And that will take a bit of a conversation, not only around the board table, but some explanation at your AGM once that change has been made. It's important to recognize that people can make tremendous contributions and not be on the board. Many people are very passionate about a particular component of the organization, whether it's the farmers market or the fair or the rodeo or the hockey rink or whatever that happens to be. And they can be the chair of a committee. They can be very involved and somewhat influential, but not necessarily have to come to the board and be part of the board meetings, understanding that the board is about the entire organization and all its components. So those people who are very passionate about being involved, we can still involve them. They just would not be at the board level. Or you can choose that you want 15 board members and you have to get 15 every year. If you'd like some conversation after the fact around how to strategize those changes, if you will, and how to manage the implementation of new bylaws, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you offline.
Okay. Can the number we set for meeting attendance be different than our number of directors/executives?
For general meetings, as far as the quorum is concerned, is probably what we're talking about. In our best practice, we suggest that 10 members at a general meeting constitutes quorum, and we suggest that 5 directors at a directors meeting constitutes quorum. So it's a bit interesting as we're actually suggesting that there's more members at a general meeting than there are board members, which means you got to scrounge somebody up out of the community to come and join you at an AGM, which is probably a good thing. Okay. Well, going once, going twice.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for attending today. I hope you found value in the presentation today. The resources will be going out to you shortly. If you don't get them for some reason, send us an email in the next day or so, and we'll make sure that you get them. Again, thank you very much for attending, and I hope to see you soon.